So we have been conducting our regular reading from last, I think, many months, and we have covered a lot of topics in these reading sessions. And we have had an opportunity to interact with a few of us on a regular basis and develop a kind of not just a virtual reading group, but actually people are very close because they have been sharing ideas and they have been talking among themselves, discussing. We have been discussing in the virtual reading group. So what I thought that we should now start approaching some text, some writings of Babasaheb Ambedkar, which are not easy to follow, and they need a lot of thinking, they need a lot of reflection, they need a lot of careful reading, and most of all, they enable us to know the thinking of Babasaheb Ambedkar very closely, because Babasaheb Ambedkar was such a thinker that he didn't had that kind of habit of speculative thinking. Whatever he did, he always was able to convey it to the people. You know, he was able to show what he saw to other people, provided they are ready to make efforts. And that is what is the beauty of Babasaheb Ambedkar's writing and speeches, particularly this text, which was not published in his lifetime, but this text we have now access to, and it's published by the government of Maharashtra, is a very profound sort of a statement. It's just 90 pages. But if we can understand the 90 pages of this particular tract, we begin to not only understand the way Babasaheb Ambedkar thought, but also we are able to think through things for ourselves. Because Babasaheb Ambedkar is a writer who won't ask us to believe anything he says unless we engage ourselves with his thought process, with his writings, with his ideas, and then he will ask you to think for yourself. So that is the beauty of the writings and speeches of Babasaheb Ambedkar. This particular tract is no exception to that particular approach of Babasaheb Ambedkar. So like we used to do in the past, we will request somebody to read, and today we will have Shashank to read a few pages. And whenever there is a time to reflect, I will just interrupt Shashank and will spell a few sort of ideas about what has been read, and then we can all sort of discuss on that. So may I request Shashank to please carry on with reading, and I will interrupt as and when.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mangesh sir. Yeah, I will start with Philosophy of Hinduism. What is the philosophy of Hinduism? This is a question which arises in its logical sequence. But apart from its logical sequence, its importance is such that it can never be omitted from consideration. Without it, no one can understand the aims and ideals of Hinduism. It is obvious that such a study must be preceded by a certain amount of what may be called clearing of the ground and defining of the terms involved. At the outset, it may be asked, what does this proposed title comprehend? Is this title of the philosophy of Hinduism of the same nature as that of the philosophy of religion? I wish I could commit myself one way or the other on this point. Indeed, I cannot. I have read a good deal on this subject, but I confess I have not got a clear idea of what is meant by philosophy of religion. This is probably due to two facts. In the first place, while religion is something definite, there is nothing definite as what is to be included in terms of philosophy. In the second place, philosophy and religion have been adversaries, if not actual antagonists, as may be seen from the story of the philosopher and the theologian. According to the story, the two were engaged in disputation, and the theologian accused the philosopher that he was like a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat which was not there. In reply, the philosopher charged the theologian, saying that He was like a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat, which was not there, but he declared to have found there. Perhaps it is the unhappy choice of the title, Philosophy of Religion, which is responsible for causing confusion in the matter of the exact definition of its field. The nearest approach to an intelligible statement as to the exact subject matter of philosophy of religion, I find in Professor Pringle Pattison, who observes, a few words may be useful at the outset as an indication of what we commonly mean by the philosophy of religion. Philosophy was described long ago by Plato as a synoptic view of things. That is to say, it is an attempt to see things together, to keep all the main features of the world in view, and to grasp them in their relation to one another as parts of one whole. Only thus can we acquire a sense of proportion and estimate aright the significance of any particular range of facts for our ultimate conclusions about the nature of the world process and the world ground. Accordingly, the philosophy of any particular department of experience, the philosophy of religion, the philosophy of art, the philosophy of law, is to be taken as meaning and analysis and interpretation of the experience in question in its bearing upon our view of man and the world in which he lives. And when the facts upon which we concentrate are so universal and in their nature so remarkable as those disclosed by the history of religion, the philosophy of man's religious experience cannot but exercise a determining influence upon our general philosophical conclusions. In fact, with many writers, the particular discussion tends to merge in the more general.
We halt here, we take a pause, and we reflect on what has been just read and what has Babasaheb Ambedkar has written. Because as I was saying that Babasaheb Ambedkar was somebody, a kind of a thinker who would not hide the process of his thinking. He is somebody who would lay bare his process of thinking as to how he has arrived at certain things. So here, I think the most important thing, two words that are very important for us to understand Babasaheb Ambedkar's approach to thinking, and particularly of this topic, philosophy of Hinduism. He says that, what is the philosophy of Hinduism? It begins with a question, and rightly so. This is a question which arises in its logical sequence. So we have to think about philosophy. What is the philosophy? And then we can think about religion. He says that if we don't understand the philosophy of Hinduism, we cannot understand the aims and ideals of Hinduism. So in order to understand aims and ideals of Hinduism, it's very important to understand the philosophy of it. I think it applies to all the religions in the world. If we want to understand the aims and objectives of, say, for example, Christianity, or for example, Islam, or for that matter, Buddhism or Sikhism, we have to understand the philosophy of that religion. And as Babasaheb Ambedkar says that any study, it's not just applicable here, but any study must be preceded by certain amount of what is called clearing of the ground. So we have to clear the ground in order to see for what it is. And secondly, defining of the terms involved. Now the terms are very important. For example, in the general languages, we have words. But in the philosophical or any academic language, we have called what is called the terms of thoughts. And the terms are very important for us to understand, because every discipline has certain terms which enable thinking in that particular discipline. So for example, like, often we give the example of force, for example. So force is a definite term of thinking in physics. But when we use the word force in the general parlance, it has a very different sort of a connotation. So we can pick up a lot of these words, like the word like bank has a very different meaning in terms of thought in banking and finance. But when we generally use it in our day-to-day affairs, it has a very different connotation, like a bank of a river or banking of the roads and so on and so forth. So it's very important when we study any discipline, we have to define the terms that are involved in thinking about those subjects. So here, Babasaheb Ambedkar is trying to, talk about the philosophy of religion. And he says that, I have read a good deal on the subject. Of course, Babasaheb Ambedkar was a voracious reader. He has read a lot on the subject, but he confesses in the beginning that I have not got a clear idea of what is meant by philosophy of religion. So even a person like Babasaheb Ambedkar had, no idea to understand what is the philosophy of religion, because, though he has read a lot. So he says that this is because of two facts. And those facts are that while the religion is something definite, there is nothing definite as to what is to be included in the term philosophy. Because religion, at least we have the books of the religion, we have the cultures, we have the traditions of the religion. So there is something definite about religion. But as far as philosophy is concerned, it's very amorphous and very difficult to define philosophy. And there are attempts in the Western tradition to define philosophy. In Indian tradition, we call it darshan, means seeing the way it is. So in the second place, the philosophy and religion have been adversaries, if not actual antagonists. And Babasaheb Ambedkar gives a very, funny story about a theologian. A person who studies religion is a theologian, and a person who, studies religion is a theologian and a philosopher. So according to the story, and I think this story is a fascinating way, a pedagogical tool to understand the difference between religion and philosophy. So the story goes like this, that, the theologian accuses the philosopher that he was like a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat which was not there. So this is what the theologian accuses the philosopher, saying that he is a blind man and in the dark room, in the blind room, and looking for a black cat which was not there. Now, to this claim of this accusation of a theologian, the philosopher replies like this, that means a theologian is like a blind man in the dark room looking for a black cat which was not there, but he declared to have found there. Okay, so this is the, the sort of story about a theologian and a philosopher. So, as Babasaheb Ambedkar says, that the choice of the title is not, is not happy title. The philosophy of religion, which is responsible for causing confusion in the matter of exact definition of its field. Because even in the field of philosophy of religion, there is no exact definition of the word philosophy of religion. So therefore, he quotes Professor Pringle Pattison, and I think this is very interesting quote. And we will learn what is the philosophy is all about, because here, the Plato is introduced. Plato was a great philosopher, as we know, and his teacher was Socrates, and it said that Western philosophy is nothing but the footnotes to Socrates and Plato, like that. So we can understand that, we have to understand philosophy as defined by Professor Pringle Pattison through the words of Plato. And Plato says that philosophy is the synoptic view of things. So now this word synoptic we need to think over, because the word synoptic means that it's a word generally applied to the research. And we have heard about the synopses and the synoptic way of reading. There are a lot of different ways of reading anything. There is a mechanical way of reading the book. Like we scan, we skim through, we browse the books. There is, of course, the way of reading the book in terms of using your analytical power. And there is another way of reading something, that is the synoptic way of reading something. So synoptic means taking the comprehensive attitude towards understanding something. So philosophy as defined by Plato is the synoptic view of things, which means that it is an attempt to see things together. So you don't try to see the things in isolation. You try to see the things in their entirety, in their all different relations, in their all different connections, as it were. So see things together to keep all the main features of the world in view and to grasp them in their relation to one another as parts of one whole. Only thus can we acquire a sense of proportion and estimate aright the significance of any particular range of facts for our ultimate conclusions. So for drawing conclusions, we need to have facts. we need to have that synoptic understanding of the things. And I think that's very profound sort of a way of looking at philosophy, because philosophizing in the affairs of Babasaheb Ambedkar is not just for speculation, but the purpose of the philosophy in the scheme of Babasaheb Ambedkar is to really reconstruct the world, to change the world, to transform the world. So this becomes very essential definition. There are, of course, one can find many definitions of philosophy in Babasaheb Ambedkar's writing and speeches, but this comes very close to, I think, the holistic understanding. So ultimate conclusions about the nature of the world process. So that, we can draw the conclusions only when we understand the world process and world ground, the ground on which anything is based on. So according to philosophy of any particular department of experience, so there are many departments of experiences that we have, like religion, art, law, and so on and so forth. It means that an analysis and interpretation of the experience in question in its bearing upon our view of man and the world in which he lives. So you see the kind of profundity of definitions that Professor Pringle Patterson has given us, and how that has been employed by Babasaheb Ambedkar to clear the terms, to clear our understanding, to clear the ground, to define the terms of the subject under our inquiry today. And when the facts upon which we concentrate are so universal and in their nature so remarkable as those disclosed by the history of religion, the philosophy of man's religious experience cannot but exercise a determining influence upon our general philosophical conclusion. So even the philosophy of religion cannot be separated, cannot be diverged away from the general sort of philosophical conclusions. In fact, with many writers, the particular discussion tends to merge in the more general. So we cannot study the philosophy of religion in isolation. We have to bring together the holistic view of the world, of the man and his place in the world. So I think that is what is all about these few paragraphs. Any reflections or anything that anybody would like to share on what we just taught? Is anybody there who would like to talk or contribute or share the reflections? If not, then we will go ahead. So, Shashank, can you go on reading further?
Yes. The facts with which a philosophy of religion has to deal are supplied by the history of religion, in the most comprehensive sense of that term. As Tyler puts it, all religions of the civilized and uncivilized world, dead and living, is a historical and psychological phenomena in all its manifestations. These facts, it should be noted, constitute the data of the philosophy of religion. They do not themselves constitute a philosophy, or, in Tyler's use of the term, a science of religion. If he says, I have minutely described all the religions in existence, their doctrines, myths, and customs, the observance they inculcate, and the organization of their adherents, tracing the different religions from their origin to their bloom and decay. I have merely collected the materials with which the science of religion works. The historical record, however complete, is not enough. Pure history is not philosophy. To achieve a philosophy of religion, we should be able to discover in the varied manifestations a common principle to whose roots in human nature we can point, whose evolution we can trace by intelligible stages from lower to higher and more adequate forms, as well as its intimate relations with the other main factors in the human civilization.
We will just reflect on this, because I think these are very dense sort of paragraphs, and we have to slow down and reflect on every single word, because they are so profound in terms of the way Babasaheb Ambedkar has quoted them. And you see this philosophy of religion, what is the data that constitute the philosophy of religion? So the data itself, the history of the religion, the sort of psychological phenomena, the historical aspect of a religion, its manifestations, these are just facts about any religion, and they are the data to study. But this data is not, as it is said, that it doesn't constitute a philosophy, or in Thailand's terms, the science of religion. So philosophy is like as a method of inquiry now. Thailand is calling it as a science of religion. And even if you describe every religion in its minute details, their doctrines, myths, and customs, the observances they inculcate, and the organization of their adherents, tracing the different religions from their origin to their bloom and decay, I have merely collected the material with which the science of religion works. So this material which is described is not just enough to describe what is called the science of religion. What we need is sort of, to discover in the varied manifestation a common principle to whose roots in human nature we can point. So human nature cannot be segregated from the data of the philosophy, that philosophy of religion that is to be studied. And the very profound statement here: pure history is not philosophy. So even if you have a historical background of a religion, it is not a philosophy of the religion. Even if we know the history of the religion, it doesn't mean that we know the philosophy of religion. And therefore we have to understand the evolution of its stages from lower to higher and more adequate forms, as well as its intimate relations with other main factors in human civilization. So human civilization is a very broad concept, and the study of religion is placed within the framework of the study of human realization. So go on, if there is no other comments on this.
Okay, sure. If this philosophy of religion, it appears to me that it is merely a different name for that department of study, which is called a comparative religion, with the added aim of discovering a common principle in the varied manifestations of religion. Whatever be the scope and value of such a study, I'm using the title Philosophy of Religion to denote something quite different from the sense and aim given to it by Professor Pringle Pattison. I'm using the word philosophy in its original sense, which was twofold. It meant teachings as it did when people spoke of the philosophy of Socrates or the philosophy of Plato. In another sense, it meant critical reason used in passing judgments upon things and events. Proceeding on this basis, philosophy of religion is to me not a merely descriptive science. I regard it as being both descriptive as well as normative. Insofar as it deals with the teachings of a religion, philosophy of religion becomes a descriptive science. Insofar as it involves the use of critical reason for passing judgment on those teachings, the philosophy of religion becomes a normative science. From this, it will be clear that what I shall be concerned with in the study of the philosophy of Hinduism. To be explicit, I shall be putting Hinduism on its trial to assess its worth as a way of life.
Okay. Now see, this is the approach of any researcher, and we know that Babasaheb Ambedkar was a well-trained researcher and a scholar who had profoundly studied the methods of inquiry. And one of the aspects of the method of inquiry, and if you are doing any academic work, you need to find out what all definitions are available, what are views of other people available on that particular topic. So having surveyed the definitions which are given by by Professor Pringle Pattison, Babasaheb Ambedkar is saying that I am not using the word philosophy in that term. I'm using the term in a very different sense. And he comes to a branch of philosophy or studies called comparative religion. So we have this a practice of comparing different religious systems, and one of the aims had been to discover something common principle involved in the religion. And Babasaheb Ambedkar goes into that in the next paragraph, but it's very important to bear in mind this term comparative religions, comparative study of religion, comparing the religions. So he says that he is not using the title in the sense that Professor Pringle and Pringle Pattison has used. I am using the word philosophy in its original sense, which was twofold. It means teaching as it did when people spoke of philosophy of Socrates or the philosophy of Plato. In another sense, the philosophy means critical reason used in passing judgments upon things and events. So I think this is a very succinct definition and an approach to understand philosophy in any domain, whether it's a philosophy of law, or whether it's a philosophy of religion, or whether it's a philosophy of art. The use of critical reasoning used in passing judgment. So the ultimate philosophical sort of attitude is to use the critical reasoning and to pass the judgment, whether on the things and events. Here, when he talks about philosophy of religion, for him, the philosophy of religion is not just descriptive science. That's something you need to describe. You are describing something. You are describing what is the teaching of that particular religion. It's not just that. He says, insofar as it involves the use of critical reason for passing judgment on those teachings, the philosophy of religion becomes a normative science. So it becomes a science, normative science, just like any other science, when it comes to applying the critical reason for passing judgment on those teachings. Very interesting point. From this, it will be clear that I shall be concerned with, in the study of the philosophy of Hinduism, to be explicit, I shall be putting Hinduism on its trial to assess its worth as a way of life. If you look at this statement from the today's context, there is a kind of a propaganda saying that Hinduism, there is nothing wrong. It's not a religion. It's beyond it. It's a way of life. And in this particular sentence, that Babasaheb Ambedkar is putting the very beloved concept of a lot of Hindus and Hindu fundamentalists on trial. He's saying that I am putting Hinduism on its trial to assess its worth as a way of life. So he's challenging. He's not challenging. He's now using the critical reasoning. He's not challenging it. He's using the critical reason to ascertain whether Hinduism is qualified as a way of life. Any comments on this? Is the text very difficult for us to study?
No.
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. So kindly go on. If you have anything to comment or anything to say, please do.
Dr. Babasaheb is gradually moving towards the criticizing the Hinduism because it was not worth as a way of life. But
Yes.
Instead of pointing directly, he is gradually moving to tell whatever he wants.
Yes.
Yeah.
But before he passes the judgment, we have to note the word critical reasoning, because he has very emphatically said that critical reasoning is very important. Without critical reasoning, we cannot pass the judgments. Whether some event or some things are right or wrong, it depends. We can only judge them after the rigorous analysis, after rigorous critical reasoning. Just like, normative science that we use in order to study something, very rigorous, very thorough, very profound, very detailed, very analytical, very synoptic, as it were.
He has used the phrase that putting on trial.
Putting on trial, yes.
This is important.
Yes.
So the Hindu religion itself is put on trial by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar.
Because he was also a
He
lawyer.
interrogate now.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, that's very good comment. Any other comment? Any other reflection before we move on?
I think the critical reasoning is nothing but to asking multiple question whether this philosophy is really can become a way of life or not, or whether this philosophy is really help to evolve as a human, whether it is connected to the roots of the human, because Professor Pragel Pattison, he is describing that whether the philosophy is a manifestation of a common principle to whose roots in human nature we can point, and whose evolution we can trace by intelligible stages from lower to higher. So I can say that the way the human beings evolved, the way human was at the ape stage, now he becomes from a Neanderthal and the very various stage. So how in that period, how that philosophy got manifested, and how it's connected to the human nature, and how it's connected to the roots of the human nature. So in that sense, we can definitely have the critical reasoning that how it's connected to human roots, and how that roots or that philosophy can become a part of life. So yeah, I can say that in that perspective, Babasaheb is putting on trial to ask a lot of questions, a lot of practical questions to Hinduism.
Good. And that's a very good point, Shashank, but I would like to also extend it further. This critical reasoning is not just to be used in case of Hinduism, but also we have to use the critical reasoning to study any religion, anything, any department of human experience. Because intelligence is very critical to Babasaheb Ambedkar's method. And to understand something as it is, to know something as it is very much sort of the part of the project of emancipation that Babasaheb Ambedkar had. So critical reasoning, I think, is a very important phrase and very nicely put by Shashank. Thank you so much. Should we go on reading further?
Sure, sir.
All right.
Yes.
Go on, Shashank.
Here is one part of the ground cleared. There remains another part to be cleared that concerns the ascertainment of the factors concerned and the definitions of the terms I shall be using. A study of the philosophy of religion, it seems to me, involve the determination of three dimensions. I call them dimension because they are like the unknown quantities contained as factors in a product. One must ascertain and define this dimension of the philosophy of religion if an examination of it is to be fruitful. Of the three dimensions, religion is the first. One must therefore define what he understands by religion in order to avoid argument being directed at cross purposes. This is particularly necessary in the case of religion for the reason that there is no agreement as to its exact definition. This is no place to enter upon an elaborate consideration of this question. I will therefore contain myself by stating the meaning in which I am using the word in the discussion which follows. I'm using the word religion to mean theology. This will perhaps be insufficient for the purposes of definition, for there are different kinds of theologies, and I must particularize which one I mean. Historically, there have been two theologies spoken of from ancient times: mythical theology and civil theology. The Greeks who distinguished them gave each a definite content. By mythical theology, they mean the tales of gods and their doing told in or implied by current imaginative literature. The civil theology, according to them, consisted of the knowledge of the various feasts and fasts of the state calendar and the ritual appropriate to them. I'm not using the word theology in either of these two senses of that word. I mean by theology, natural theology, which is the doctrine of God and the divine as an integral part of the theory of nature. As traditionally understood, there are three theses which natural theology propounds. Number one, that God exists and is the author of what we call nature or universe. Number two, that God controls all the events which make nature. Number three, God exercises a government over mankind in accordance with his sovereign moral law. I'm aware that there is another class of theology known as revealed theology, spontaneous self-disclosure of divine reality, which may be distinguished from natural theology. But this distinction does not really matter. For, as has been pointed out, that revelation may either leave the results won by natural theology, standing without modification, merely supplementing them by further knowledge not attainable by unassisted human effort. Or is it may transform the natural theology in such a way that all the truths of natural theology would acquire richer and deeper meaning when seen in the light of true revelation? But the view that a genuine natural theology and a genuine revelational theology might stand in real contradiction may be safely excluded as not being possible. Taking the three theses of theology, namely existence of God, second, God's provisional government of the universe, and third, God's moral government of mankind, I take religion to mean the propounding of an ideal scheme of divine governance, the aim and object of which is to make the social order in which men live a moral order. This is what I understand by religion. And this is the sense in which I shall be using the term religion in this discussion.
We stop here for a bit, for a moment, and because there is so much in these paragraphs. So I think
there is one line in my mind, if
okay.
allow me.
Please.
I think Babasaheb has very rightly shared in the first pages only that while we are discussing the religion, it's religion is something definite. That is, there is nothing definite. And the philosophy and religion have a lot of causing confusions. And that the example that has given, in the dark we are searching for the cat by the blind man, and that fits here, I think.
Okay. So I think we will reflect on this. That was a good point, and we will reflect on what is called the. Can you please mute your mic? Okay, so there is one ground that Babasaheb Ambedkar cleared about what is the philosophy of religion, and now he is coming on to a very interesting thing, that religion to him, to Babasaheb Ambedkar, involves determination of three dimensions. So he puts sort of a three dimensions to understand a religion, and these three dimensions are very important. So the first dimension, to study, to understand, to clarify the term, to define the terms. I think it's very interesting that he talks about, very interesting point here is that he also defines what is a dimension. I call them dimensions because they are like the unknown quantities contained as factors in the product. One must ascertain and define these dimensions of the philosophy of religion if an examination of it is to be fruitful. Of the three dimensions, religion is the first. So the first dimension that Babasaheb Ambedkar is going to study is the religion itself. The second dimension that Babasaheb Ambedkar is going to study is the ideal scheme for which a religion stands. So what is the ideal scheme for which the religion stands? And the third dimension that Babasaheb Ambedkar is going to talk about is the criteria to be adopted for judging the value of the ideal scheme of divine governance for which a given religion stands. So there are basically three dimensions that Babasaheb Ambedkar would be discussing when he is talking about clarifying what is called the philosophy of religion. So what is it that is the philosophy of religion's three dimension? So the first dimension is religion itself. So in order to define what is a religion, there is a particular necessity in which, in the case of religion, for the reason that there is no agreement as to its exact definition. As our brother said, that there is no agreement. So always, there is always a problem because people understood something differently. So the first thing is to really arrive at a common definition. So in any argument, it's very important to define the terms, arrive at the common sort of an agreement as to, are we all talking about the same words, same terms, same thing, same phenomena. So he says that according to him, he's not going to enter into the elaborate consideration of this question. I will therefore contain myself by stating the meaning in which I'm using the word in the discussion which follows. So, but Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar is using the word religion, which as equivalent to theology. This will perhaps be insufficient for the purposes of definition, for there are different kinds of theologies, and I must particularize which one I mean. So even in the theology, in the scheme of theology, there are a lot of different definitions of theology, and there are a lot of different variations in the definitions of theology. So he has given us the three definitions of three views about the theology. One is, of course, the mythical theology that he talked about. The Greeks who distinguished them gave each a definite content. By mythical theology, they meant the tales of gods and their doing told in or implied by current imaginative literature. So there was, of course, in the Greek tradition, a lot of imaginative literature. We know the stories of Apollos and so many gods. And there was, of course, this mythical theology. And then there was a civil theology. Like civil theology, according to them, consisted of the knowledge of the various feast and fast of the state, calendar, and the ritual appropriate to them. So it is the second theology, civil theology was about the civil society, as it were. So he is not using the word theology in either of these two senses of that word. Babasaheb Ambedkar meant by theology, natural theology. And he goes on defining what is the natural theology. The natural theology, according to Babasaheb Ambedkar, is the doctrine of God and the divine. Number one point about the natural theology. And as integral part of the theory of nature, as traditionally understood, there are three theses which natural theology propounds. So three theses on which natural theology propounds. One, that God exists and is the author of what we call nature or universe. Two, that God controls all the events which make nature. And three, God exercises a government over mankind in accordance with his sovereign moral law. So you see, Babasaheb Ambedkar has given the three dimensions of religion, and now he is studying one dimension of religion as theology. In theology, he has categorized three things: the mythical theology, the civil theology, and natural theology. And he says that he is giving press on what is called the natural theology, and he has given the three postulates or the three sort of theses of the natural theology: that God exists and is the author of what we call nature or universe, that God controls all the events which make nature, and God exercises a government over mankind in accordance with his sovereign moral law. I think why this is very important for us to understand is because he's creating a kind of, he's clarifying, he's clearing the ground, he's clearing the terms that he's using. And that way we can see the thought process, which is leading to more clarity, where there is no exact definition, where there is no clarity at all. So any comments?
Sir, can I make just one point?
Yes, please.
First of all, Jai Bhim to everyone. So I just try to, entirely synopsize what Babasaheb said. So here this essay is about criticizing Hinduism. So first of all, there are two things in it. First of all, he needs to define what this religion thing is. Secondly, he needs to search for some norm or criteria to pass judgments on this religion. Okay. So he begins by saying, what is religion? So there is no clarity about it. So he simply calls religion as theology. Again, if you take any religion, it has many things. So a religion has mythology stories, a religion has mysticism, a religion has social rules. So there are many things in a religion. So Babasaheb says, out of all these things, we have to select in a religion those social rules which regulate the life between individuals in a society. Now, the important question is just one point. So why is it important? Because these social rules itself influence the formation of all the mythologies and mysticism. Because Babasaheb's understanding of literature is very different. He says these religious texts are nothing but the reflection of life. Say, for example, in Hoover Shudras, he talks about Vasishtha and Vishwamitra. So you might say this is just a mythology, it has got nothing to do with it. But no, even in mythologies, the formation of mythologies, social rules play a lot of role. The fight between Vishwamitra and Vasishtha is about caste. So that's why he selects the social rules in a religion out of all other things, because it exposes the true nature of it. Yes, thank you, sir. Done.
Very good, very good. Nikhil, when we are not reading the text, can you unshare the screen so that we can see who is speaking?
Sir, I'm SPVS item.
Yes, Sairam, I know, because but it's very difficult to know. Okay, like this. If the screen is like this, then we can know who is speaking. Okay, so I think Sairam, that was a wonderful point, and we are of course going to. These are 90 pages that we are going to study, and there is so much in these 90 pages that if we try to unravel a lot of concepts, there is a rich sort of thoughts that we would be able to get hold of. And I think what you said is exactly right. I think to my mind, what is important is the way Babasaheb Ambedkar operates in terms of his thinking process. And the way he operates is that, he is clarifying how he came to certain conclusions, by what process, how he cleared the ground, how he clarified the concepts, how he tried to make the connections between various ideas. I think that is also an exercise that we all should be mindful of when we are studying any book of Babasaheb Ambedkar. And this is a classic example, particularly those young people who are into academia, as to how they should be writing their papers, as to how they will be making their inquiries into the objects of their studies. I think this is a kind of, I would say, an example of how it can be done. Okay, Mahasen sir.
I think Babasaheb wanted to, point out what is the worth of Hinduism as a way of life. That he wanted to point out. And this is the beginning. Just he is putting that Hindu religion on trial, trial as a way of life for human being. How it is important. What is the worth of Hinduism as a way of life for human being? That is what he wanted to point out. I feel.
Yes.
That's so.
Interesting. So I think that is it. We go on reading other things. Can you read further if there are no comments?
Yes, sir. The second dimension is to know the ideal scheme for which a religion stands, to define what is the fixed, permanent, and dominant part in the religion of any society, and to separate its essential characteristics from those which are unessential is often very difficult. The reason for this difficulty, in all probability, lies in the difficulty pointed out by Professor Robertson Smith, when he says the traditional usages of religion had grown up gradually in the course of many centuries and reflected habits of thought, characteristic of very diverse stages of man's intellectual and moral development. No conception of the nature of the gods could possibly afford the clue to all parts of that motley complex of rites and ceremonies which the latter paganism had received by inheritance from a series of ancestors in every state of culture from pure savagery upwards. The record of the religious thought of mankind as it is embodied in religious institutions resembles the geological record of the history of the earth's crust. The new and the old are preserved side by side, or rather, layer upon layer. The same thing has happened in India. Speaking about the growth of religion in India, says Professor Max Muller, we have seen religion growing up from stage to stage, from the simplest childish prayers to the highest metaphysical abstractions. In the majority of the hymns of the Veda, we might recognize the childhood. In the Brahmanas and their sacrificial, domestic, and moral ordinances, the busy manhood. In the Upanishads, the old age of the Vedic religion. We could have well understood if, with the historical progress of the Indian mind, they had discarded the purely childish prayers as soon as they had arrived at the maturity of the Brahmanas. And if, when the vanity of sacrifices and the real character of the old gods had once been recognized, they would have been superseded by the more exalted religion of the Upanishads. But it was not so. Every religious thought that had once found expression in India, that had once been handed down as a sacred heirloom, was preserved. And the thoughts of three historical periods, the childhood, the manhood, and the old of the Indian nation, were made to do permanent service in the three stages of the life of every individual. Thus alone can we explain how the same sacred code, the Veda, contains not only the records of the different phases of religious thought, but of doctrines which we may call almost diametrically opposed to each other. But this difficulty is not so great in the case of religions which are positive religions. The fundamental characteristic of positive religions is that they have not grown up like primitive religion, under the action of unconscious forces operating silently from age to age, but trace their origin to the teachings of great religious innovators who spoke as the organs of divine revelation. Being the result of conscious formulations, the philosophy of religion is easy to find and easy to state. Hinduism, like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is in the main a positive religion. One does not have to search for a scheme of divine governance. It is not like an unwritten constitution. On the Hindu scheme of divine governance is enshrined in a written constitution, and anyone who cares to know it will find it laid bare in their sacred book called the Manusmriti. A divine code which lays down the rules which govern the religious, ritualistic, and the social life of the Hindus in the minute detail, and which must be regarded as the Bible of the Hindus and containing the philosophy of Hinduism.
Okay, well, we wait here. We wait and we gloss over these things. Like the first dimension of the philosophy of religion that Babasaheb Ambedkar wanted to expound was about the religion in terms of theology, and he has tried to define theology in terms of three ways. And also he has talked about what is called the revelational theology. And he has talked about really revelational theology as my stand excluded as not being possible. So, there are religions which are revealed. So there is a revelation that has come to certain people, and based on those revelations, they have tried to propound their religious concepts. And therefore, we see that when Babasaheb Ambedkar talks about the revelational theology, he is discounting it. He's not talking about the revelationary theology. So basically, he has given us a kind of the various dimension of the word theology, and we have to bear in mind. And the second dimension, remember that Babasaheb Ambedkar has talked about 3 dimensions. The first dimension is religion equal to theology. The second dimension that he has talked about, the ideal scheme for which a religion stands. And when he's talking about the ideal scheme for which the religion stands, he is quoting Robertson Smith, saying that we can see that there are different sort of religious thoughts which resemble the geological records of the history. So you know that in the geology we have different layers, the time periods, like we have Cambrian period, Permian period, and so on and so forth. Like that, they are layered. So he's saying, quoting Max Muller, Babasaheb Ambedkar is saying that the same thing had happened in India, that what Max Muller says about Hinduism, that there is a child stage, there is manhood stage, there is a old age stage, and one has not surpassed another. They all live together. That's what Babasaheb Ambedkar is quoting Max Muller, and he's saying that even if you look at the Vedas, the so-called sacred codes, there are a lot of doctrines which are contradictory to each other, because everything is accumulated. It has not grown. It's like statistics, statically hold. There is no development, there is no growth. Everything is hold. Whatever there is, everything is accumulated. But Babasaheb Ambedkar goes on defining what is called the positive religions. So what is a positive religion in comparison with the primitive religions? That the primitive religions operate unconsciously. So there is a lot of things about the so-called Hindu thinkers. They talk about their religion being very primitive, very old, and it has evolved from something unknown. Babasaheb Ambedkar says that it's not so. The positive religions can trace their origin to the teachings of the great religious innovators. Now keep these terms in your mind. The term called great religious innovator, and we have known in the history of the humanity that there were religious innovators. Like there was Jesus Christ, there was Muhammad Paigambar, there was a lot of the religions that we see around, like in Sikhism, Guru Nanak, so on and so forth. So there were these great religious innovators who spoke as the organ of divine revelation, being the result of conscious formulation of religion. So Hinduism is not something which is coming from the primitive sort of things, though a lot of things from the past are there and contradicting each other. This is a very important point that Babasaheb Ambedkar makes, that Hinduism is having a written constitution. It has a Bible, it has a sacred book. And there is often a riddle that Babasaheb Ambedkar has put in the riddles of Hinduism. What is Hinduism? What is their sacred book? So this is a very fundamental point here, that Babasaheb Ambedkar says that on the Hindu scheme of divine governance is enshrined in the written constitution, and anyone who cares to know it will find it laid bare in the sacred book called Manusmriti. So Manusmriti is the Bible of the Hindus. And then what about Bhagavad Gita or other literature that is going to come? About Bhagavad Gita, Babasaheb Ambedkar says that is the Manusmriti in a nutshell. Very profound sentence, very few words, but he says Bhagavad Gita is nothing but Manusmriti in a nutshell. And we are going to look at that. But here we look at it as a divine code which lays down the rituals which govern the religious, ritualistic, social life of Hindus in minute details. The Manusmriti goes in minute details about governing the lives of the people, and which must be regarded as the Bible of the Hindus and containing the philosophy of Hinduism. So this second dimension is very important to understand, ideal scheme for which a religion stands for. What are the ideals? What is the ideal scheme? What is the ideal of that religion? What does it stand for? Is a very important sort of a dimension of a religion, and they go hand in hand. The theology go in hand with the ideal scheme for which the religion stands, and also for the criteria to be adopted for judging the value of the ideal scheme of divine governance for which a given religion stands. Okay, so anything else? Anything else there? Any comments?
No, sir.
Look, this is, as we know, that these issues are not easy to think through, because there is so much of a confusion. There is so much of a confusion about categories of thinking. There are so much confusion about the terms of thoughts. There is so much confusion about definitions, and Babasaheb Ambedkar is now clearing the path, and he is asking us to apply the method that he's applying to study the philosophy of religion. And I think it's very profound to the way Babasaheb Ambedkar has gone on to explain things in this particular tract. So we will read further. If there is nothing, no comments or no reflection, we will read further.
Okay. The third dimension in the philosophy of religion is the criteria to be adopted for judging the value of the ideal scheme of divine governance for which a given religion stands. Religion must be put on its trial. By what criteria shall it be judged? That leads to the definition of the norm. Of the three dimensions, this third one is the most difficult one to be ascertained and defined. Unfortunately, the question does not appear to have been tackled, although much has been written on the philosophy of religion, and certainly no method has been found for satisfactorily dealing with the problem. One is left to one's own method for determining the issue. As for myself, I think it is safe to proceed on the view that to know the philosophy of any movement or any institution, one must study the revolutions which the movement or the institution has undergone. Revolution is the mother of philosophy, and if it is not a mother of philosophy, it is a lamp which illuminates philosophy. Religion is no exception to this rule. To me, therefore, it seems quite evident that the best method to ascertain the criteria by which to judge the philosophy of religion is to study the revolutions which religion has undergone. That is the method which I propose to adopt.
We'll stop here. So the three dimensions that Babasaheb Ambedkar has talked about in terms of theology, in terms of ideal scheme, and the criteria to judge the ideal scheme. In other words, the norm by which the ideal scheme will be judged. So I think these three dimensions are very important. And the third dimension, as Babasaheb Ambedkar says, is very difficult to be ascertained and defined. So how to define the criteria to know the ideal scheme of any religion? And this criteria, this norm, is very difficult for one to understand. And this paragraph that we have just read, even if you read it again and again and again and again, it will not exhaust its meaning. It's so profound a paragraph. Because in this particular inquiry into religion, the philosophy of religion that Babasaheb Ambedkar is launching, he's saying that there is so much written on the philosophy of religion, but there is no method has been found for satisfactorily dealing with the problem. So the problem of norm, the problem of criteria has not been discovered or found. So there is no method. And in the scheme or the thinking of Babasaheb Ambedkar or any thinking person, it's very important to understand what is the method by which they have arrived at certain conclusions. And Babasaheb Ambedkar is saying that there is no method to satisfactorily deal with the problem. So one is left to one's own method for determining the issue, because there is no method. So Babasaheb Ambedkar says that I have to use my own method to understand the philosophy of religion. And this statement itself is potentially so essential for us that Babasaheb Ambedkar, after having studied the whole gamut of literature on the philosophy of religion, has found that there are a lot of people who have tried to describe the religions, the teachings of it. There is no normative science that has evolved to study the religion, and there is no method that has been found to study the religion, the philosophy of religion. And he says that therefore I'm going to use my own method. I have devised my own method, and he says that to understand or to study the philosophy of any movement or any institution, it is not just about any movement, but about any institution, has undergone revolution. How many revolutions have taken place in that religion, in that institution is very important. And he says that revolution is the mother of philosophy. And it's very true. If we read the Revolution and Counter-Revolution written by Babasaheb Ambedkar, we see that the philosophies have changed, and there have been revolutions and the counter-revolutions, and based on that, the philosophies have changed. So as Babasaheb Ambedkar says that the revolution is the mother of philosophy, and if it is not the mother of philosophy, it is a lamp which illuminates philosophy. So if we understand the philosophies, if we want to understand the philosophies, we have to understand the revolutions that have taken place in that particular movement or institution. Religion is no exception to this. He says that religions are not also exceptional to me. Therefore, it seems quite evident that the best method to ascertain the criteria by which to judge the philosophy of religion is to study the revolutions which religion has undergone. This is the method which I propose to adopt. See, having read different literature and having read different authors, I think the test of one's independent mind is to find a way, your own way, an independent way to understand something. It's like you are lost in a thick forest and nobody has found a way into the forest. So you are trying to ascertain your own path, which will lead to something deep in the forest. And that is what Babasaheb Ambedkar is doing. And he's saying that I am bringing the method of revolution. Revolution is my method to study the philosophy of religion. So go on. If there is nothing, then we go. I think this is a very important for the young people who are in the class today to understand. I would request them to read it again and again and again to understand for themselves as to how important it is to have that independent way of looking at things, of clearing the grounds, of trying to devise a method if it doesn't exist to study any particular thing. In this case, the philosophy of religion. Go on.
Yes. Students of history are familiar with one religious revolution. That revolution was concerned with the sphere of religion and the extent of its authority. There was a time when religion had covered the whole field of human knowledge and claimed infallibility for what it taught. It covered astronomy and taught a theory of the universe according to which the earth is at rest in the center of the universe, while the sun, moon, planets, and system of fixed stars revolved round earth in its own sphere. It included biology and geology and propounded the view that the growth of life on earth had been created all at once and had contained from the time of creation onwards. All the heavenly bodies that it now contains and all kinds of animals or plants. It claimed medicine to be its province and taught that disease was either a divine visitation as punishment for sin, or it was the work of demons, that it could be cured by intervention of saints, either in person or through their holy relics, or by prayers or pilgrimages, or when due to demons by exorcism, and by treatment which the demons and the patient found disgusting. It also claimed physiology and psychology to be its domain and taught them that the body and soul were two distinct substances. Bit by bit, this vast empire of religion was destroyed. The Copernican revolution freed astronomy from the domination of religion. The Darwinian revolution freed biology and geology from the trammels of religion. The authority of theology in medicine is not yet completely destroyed. Its intervention in medical questions still continues. Opinion on such subjects as birth control, abortion, and sterilization of the defective are still influenced by theological dogmas. Psychology has not completely freed itself from its entanglements. Nonetheless, Darwinism was such a severe blow that the authority of theology was shattered all over to such an extent that it never afterwards made any serious effort to remain its lost empire. It is quite natural that this disruption of the empire of religion should be treated as a great revolution. It is a result of the warfare which science waged against theology for 400 years, in which many pitched battles were fought between the two, and the excitement caused by them was so great that nobody could fail to impress by the revolution that was blazing on.
We will stop here. We will wait here and this thing. I think, can we unshare the screen? Okay, thank you. So you see, when Babasaheb Ambedkar is talking about the revolutions, and he's talking about the religious revolution. So he's talking about the religions in terms of its authority. In the past, the religion has an authority over all domains of human life, all domains of human society. And Babasaheb Ambedkar has used a very interesting phrase called empire of religion, where E is capital and R is also capital. So this religion has colonized all the domains of knowledge, all the domains of human affairs, human societies, and so on and so forth. And there was like this, the religion claimed that it has covered the whole field of human knowledge and claimed infallibility for what is taught. So according to the theory, they had this theory called the earth is at the center of the universe. And the Bible claimed that the earth is the center of the universe. And then when the scientists went on to examine the sky, they found that it's not so. And they found by scientific methods that earth is not the center of the universe. The center of the our solar system is the sun, heliocentric theory. And the church was opposed to it for a long time. And there was, of course, a fight between the church and the scientist, Tache Bruno was burnt alive for having said this. And Galileo has to retrieve his statement that the sun is at the center of the universe. And now the whole concept of universe has changed. The scientific findings have given rise to a very different sort of a worldview that was preached by the astronomy, which was inspired by the religion. Such was the case with medicine. Such was the case with psychology. Such was the case with biology. You see, the biology, there was a lot of discussion, because according to the book of Genesis, or even the Brahminical books, or even the books of Islam, there is a theory of Genesis which says that the people were created at once, while Darwin has found that there is an evolution. Everything grows, evolves from basic structures to more complex structures, and there is no God who has created the mankind. The human beings have evolved, and now there are a lot of this scientific material available which gives the evidences as to how the human beings evolved. And the DNA studies, or what is called the study of the past, the biological sciences, the molecular biology, everything has pointed out to the fact that the human beings have evolved from the unicellular organism to what we have today. And there is a diversity in the life forms that has evolved from basic simple design. And also all these designs can evolve, and that can also be demonstrated by the simulations games in the computer. So the biology has been challenged completely, as where it was in the domain of religion. Science has completely challenged it, and this is a revolution in thought. So Babasaheb Ambedkar talks about two revolutions: Copernican revolution and the Darwinian revolution, that has completely dislodged the empire of religion. So even today, even such is the case, but its medical questions still continues. Even if such is the case, there are many people in the world, even in India, they believe that they get diseases because of their sins, They believe that there are the questions about birth control, particularly in America. There is a big debate on abortion, the rights of abortion, and the fundamental Christians are opposed to abortion. And birth control means use of contraceptives, and so on and so forth. Even the theological dogmas are influencing them today. And even in the realm of psychology is not completely released from the grip of the religions. So what Babasaheb Ambedkar is saying in this period, in the paragraph, it is quite natural that this disruption of the empire of religion should be treated as a great revolution. It is the result of the warfare which science waged against theology for 400 years, in which many pitched battles were fought between the two, and the excitement caused by them was so great that nobody could fail to be impressed by the revolution that was blazing on. Isn't it? So this is what I think very important for us to understand today is the way Babasaheb Ambedkar is using the method of revolution, and everything will become clear gradually when we enter into the heart of the text, because we are now just on to the 9th page, and I think we can pause here for today and maybe read this paragraph. And then we pause. Read the 2 paragraphs and we pause. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay, go on.
There is no doubt that this religious revolution has been a great blessing. It has established freedom of thought. It has enabled society to assume control of itself, making its own the world it once shared with superstition, facing undaunted the things of its former fears, and so carving out for itself from the realm of mystery in which it lies a sphere of unhampered action and a field of independent thought. The process of secularization is not only welcomed by scientists for making civilization, as distinguished from culture, possible even religious men and women have come to feel that much of what theology thought was unnecessary and a mere hindrance to the religious life, and that this chopping off its wild growth was a welcome process. But for ascertaining the norm for judging the philosophy of religion, we must turn to another and a different kind of revolution which religion has undergone. That revolution touches the nature and the content of ruling conception of the relations of God to man, of society to man, and of man to man. How great was this revolution can be seen from the differences which divide civic society from civilized society. Strange as it may seem, no systematic study of this religious revolution has so far been made. Nonetheless, this revolution is so great and so immense that it has brought about a complete transformation in the nature of religion, as it is taken to be by savage society and by civilized society, although very few seem to be aware of it.
Okay, we stop here and we can unshare now. All right. So you see, when Babasaheb Ambedkar is talking about the religious revolution, he says that the freedom of thought, and I think this is a very important concept, the freedom of thought, because even the thoughts of the people were not independent that time, because everything was governed by the empire of religion. Whatever the religion said was taken to be the ultimate truth, nothing but the truth. And when there was a scientific revolution, it removed, it weakened the clutches of the religion, and the human beings could have that freedom of thought. And it has enabled the society to assume control of itself, because before it was believed that religion is controlling everything, there is a God who is controlling everything. So it's very important statement that the society started taking the control of itself, making its own the world it once shared with superstition, facing undaunted the things of its former fears, and so carving out for itself from the realm of mystery in which it lies a sphere of unhampered action and the field of independent thought. Now, what we call about secular is completely different from the scheme that Babasaheb Ambedkar has put forth. And I think that is what we have to understand about secularization. So this is the process of secularization by which the authority of the religion is challenged. So secular doesn't mean religiously neutral, isn't it? It means challenging the authority wherever it is trying to encroach upon unnecessary. So religion is trying to govern our personal lives, religion is trying to govern our public lives, and so on and so forth. And the process of secularization, as we have seen, has freed human beings from the clutches, from the grip of the religions. At least in theory, we can say that. So the process of secularization is not only welcomed by scientists for making civilization as distinguished from culture possible. Even religious men and women have come to feel that much of what theology taught was unnecessary and a mere hindrance to the religious life, and this chopping of its wild growth was a welcome process. Now, this is about the revolution that Babasaheb Ambedkar has talked about, particularly the revolution that the science has brought into play. The second sort of revolution that has come into play, and we are going to look at it in the next class, but Babasaheb Ambedkar has touched here very beautifully, and I'm going to just have some between the God and man, and the man, the society to man, and man to man. So it was a triangle, the God, society, and man. It was like a triangle. Everything is connected with each other. It was like that in the old scheme of the things. And how great was this evolution can be seen from the differences which divide savage society from civilized society. So, you know, there was a savage society, and it has now, according to Babasaheb Ambedkar, has become a little bit of a civilized society. So he says that it has, because of the revolution that has taken place, there is now a civilized society. Strange as it may seem, no systematic study of this religious evolution has been made so far. So Babasaheb Ambedkar is saying that nobody has made serious attempt to study this religious evolution as to what happened. You know, what caused the savage society to turn into a civilized society, and how the religions got transformed from the tribalistic or savage society into a society called a civilized society. So that's what is the topic. Next class we are going to look into, and we will halt here today, and open up for more discussion today. We can just reflect on this, whatever is said here or whatever has been written here, we can just reflect on it.